Sometimes we try something a little new. Go okay? Well, a few weeks ago, I had the chance. I was out of the pulpit here and out of the worship service here because I was participating in a service of ordination for one of our colleagues in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And this ordination service was for an individual, a man who used to work here in our congregation named Nathan Ryan. When Nathan was working here, I know it's good news, huh? When Nathan was working here at the church, he served as the director of lay ministries, and his job here in the congregation was to try and help every member of the church that he could to find the place where they could give and be of service to the members of this church and to the community. It's a big job. And we gathered in Baton Rouge at the church where Nathan is going to serve with another minister, and I don't know how many of you have been to an ordination service for a Unitarian Universalist minister. It's about as high church as we get. It's a service that often looks very similar from minister to minister. And we gathered, we sang hymns, we listened to addresses from visiting ministers, we sang, we prayed. And there's a point at the service where every person in the congregation lays hands on the person being ordained. Nathan kind of kneeled on the ground, and his family and friends gathered around him and put their hands on him, and then somebody had their hands on them, and somebody had their hands on them. And this is a tradition that goes back thousands of years in a blessing or ordination of people, clergy, and lay. But the interesting thing to me about a UU ordination is that in our tradition, a church is the only group of individuals that can ordain a person into the ministry. It isn't a bishop, it isn't the denomination, it isn't a religion as a whole that ordains somebody. It's a very specific group of people who vote to do it and then do it. His church was making him a minister. They were using the power that only that gathered group of people has. It occurred to me that as we were helping to ordain our friend who had been the director of lay ministries, helping people serve one another, that what we were doing was producing the ministry of the church. It occurred to me as we were preparing for his ordination that in a church like ours, that's always what we're called to do. That each and every one of us is always called to be producing the work and ministry of a congregation like ours, because of what we affirm about human life. So different religious traditions have different approaches to what they would call salvation, or in the language I'd like to use today, what makes a human life healed and whole. Some religious traditions would say that what brings that fullness to life is a sacrament or blessing from an ordained member of the clergy. Some other traditions say that it comes from inviting the will of God or a particular deity into your life and heart. Other religions say that human salvation or healing and wholeness comes from believing the right thing. Well, for progressive, or what's often called liberal religion, for many years we've come to the conclusion that what makes the life healed and whole is love and justice. And these are not things that you get from an outside source. Love and justice are things that we all have to build together. So for us, we've come to the conclusion that what makes a human life healed and whole depends very much on how you and I live with one another. While we're always called to be producers in this arrangement, I do find that it's tempting for us to catch ourselves living into the kind of mentality of a consumer that is so pervasive in our culture. To imagine that church is something that you come to watch other than something that you come to build. And the architecture of the space would lead you to believe that that's what we come to do. It looks like church happens on the chancel here. I think, though, we can find ourselves falling into a consumer rather than producer mentality when we catch ourselves talking more in language of, did we like this or not, instead of, how do I feel called to respond and live with the people I love and serve? Now, I know that none of you in the room have ever done this, but I have been told that a discerning parishioner from time to time will look in the newsletter to see who's preaching or what the sermon topic is before deciding to come to church on a Sunday morning. Which in some sense is kind of akin to saying to your friend, I would love to spend a few hours with you in your home if you're going to serve the food I like. I know that it's sometimes tempting for us to find this place after so many years that looks like finally the place that is always going to be what I expected. The place that is not like others, this dependable reality that will always be as I hope it will be. And if that's the case, there's some disappointment around the corner. Church isn't a static product that you can come to consume, it's to produce. And this all sounds a little abstract, I think, as I'm saying it out loud, but I think it makes a big difference what kind of questions we ask in our relationship with other human beings in this church and outside the walls and the culture we live in here in Dallas. I think if we ask consumer-type questions of our human relationships, we get pretty limited answers. So the question, do I like what I'm experiencing right now, or would he or she like my church, only ever has two answers. Yes or no. If I ask, do the people that live outside of the walls of this church like what we have? Would they want what we're selling? Then the world is very quickly divided into two camps. Those who get it and those who don't. And I think it is tempting for people of a progressive faith mindset to assume that the group of people who would get it is very small. I think the consumer-type question around church takes away our agency with it. If the question is, do I like this or not, then it's assuming that church was this thing that was already built before I got there, and my power is to say, I like it or not. That my job is to decide if other people will like it or not. Instead of the notion that this is something we're constantly building together. There's a question in my mind that I've been kind of using as a bit of a mantra lately in an internal prayer when I'm engaging with other people that I think is a producer-type question, and it is, what can we build together? This changes when I'm having a difficult moment with a human being. Do I like what's happening here? Sometimes the answer is no. If I ask myself, what can we build together? Suddenly I'm responsible for something in that relationship I wasn't responsible for before. I think when we ask ourselves a question like, what can we build together inside the walls of this church, it calls us to a radical hospitality with each other. I think sometimes it's easy for us to repeat that false narrative around Unitarian Universalism or progressive traditions that says, this is the place where you can be free from a long list of things. Free from creeds, free from doctrines, free from all of the pushy ways of being religious that people have shown you in your life. And I know at times in the extreme version of that I've kind of heard people say, oh, I wouldn't want to say hello to somebody when they came in the door. That might be too pushy. In church. But I know that if we imagine this as the place where we can be free from a lot of things, we almost pretend that it's a virtue to leave people alone. In a church like ours, where each and every one of us is called to be a builder of beloved community on earth, it matters a lot how we greet each other at the door. It matters a lot how you interact with the person sitting next to you in the pews, if you interact with the person sitting next to you in the pews. Let me put it this way. It's the difference between imagining that church is like a movie theater or church is like your house. If you go to the movies, we've all paid to see a product that is happening up here. And it doesn't matter much if I make eye contact or talk to the person sitting next to me. In fact, that's kind of a hindrance to their experience of the product. I don't have to know their name. I get there early to get my seat so that I can have the best view of the thing, which is happening up here. And then when it's over, if their experience of the movie was good or bad, it has very little to do with me. I can even suggest that they awkwardly try and move around me if they're late and I've already chosen my seat. People who are late or a crying baby are interruptions to my movie-going experience. But if church is my house, if I'm not the guest, if I'm the host, then the whole thing's different. It means that the person who's late or the crying baby are not an interruption to my church viewing experience. How I respond to that person who's late or the crying baby is church. It means that it matters very much whether or not I've been sitting next to a person for an hour and don't know that I'm sitting next to them. I know that we've sometimes in this church hear people say, I'm intimidated to welcome people who are new at the door or go up to somebody in Channing Hall because I don't want to be pushy in my religious expression. I've seen that happen a million times and I don't want to be that person. It is as simple and as important as someone coming to your home. If someone came to our house who had never been there before or was here for a party for the first time, we'd say, hi, my name's Aaron, welcome to my house. Can I get you somewhere to sit and something to drink? It's often just that easy in our relationship with other people in our churches. The key here for me in being a builder of our community or being a consumer of it is realizing that how you interact with people in the door or the person who's sitting next to you right now is as much church as anything that gets said or not said from this pulpit. In fact, what we know from statistics and studies, and there's a lot of church statistics and studies out there, is that most people visiting a church for the first time know whether it was a place that welcomed them with genuine, heartfelt hospitality within the first 7 to 11 minutes of their time at that place, which is usually a long time before they've ever heard anyone speak from a pulpit or even heard a piece of music. It means that you are the ministry of the church at the door, and you're the ministry of the church in a classroom, that you're the ministry of the church by how you greet the people sitting next to you. And I hope that you know how much it does matter. We repeat these stories sometimes of our colleagues who tell us that they had a parishioner tell them that the only times they hear the word "I love you" spoken are in one of our congregations. That's an incredible notion. That there's someone in this room today who never hears the words "I love you" spoken outside from a context like ours. We hear the stories repeated often of the individual whose only physical human contact in a week happens in the receiving line in the narthex or a handshake in the fellowship hall. It matters how we greet one another. People rarely decide to get up on Spring Forward and get into their car and come to church because they just have too much community and support in the rest of their lives. I will tell you, I know from people's experience, people in this room today who have told us, I was having an incredibly difficult day, doubting myself and my value, and I showed up, and somebody in this church looked me in the eyes and said, I am glad to see you here today. And it changed everything. It matters very much whether you're a builder of this ministry or watching it. I think when we ask ourselves the kind of question, what can we build together outside the walls of this church, it looks like radical engagement of the culture around us. That means radical engagement of Dallas, Texas. And I think that means sometimes confronting the notion that Unitarian Universalism or progressive churches are places where we get to go and be separated from the culture outside. Here we are, located the physical address of this church in one of the most culturally conservative neighborhoods in the United States of America. Yeah? What a tremendous opportunity. What a tremendous opportunity. But if we ask ourselves consumer-type questions of the culture, then we're going to say, are the people outside these walls ones who want what we're selling or not? And I think when we ask that question, it becomes incredibly easy for us to answer with, probably not. The world is quickly divided into camps of those who would get it and those who wouldn't. And of course, those who would get it are always a smaller group than those who would. I found it interesting that it's not just progressives who tell that exact same story. There's a church here in Dallas that has over 11,000 members. They are incredibly religiously conservative. They have influence in presidential elections. And recently I heard one of their clergy say to their gathered group of parishioners, we're losing the culture war. The culture outside of us here in Dallas is not ours. Either they're wrong, or we're wrong, or we're all asking the wrong question. Do the people who live in my city want what I have to sell is a simple question. Am I able to build beloved community on earth with people who don't think like I do is an entirely different one. And I think if we ask demographic questions of the culture that surrounds us, we're going to miss out on so many partners for good, meaningful, loving, justice-filled work. That's why I love what we've been trying to do this year in our year of engagement and service. Recently, I found myself dismissing somebody and realizing that I was asking a totally consumer-type question of who they were. Recently, I've been in a kind of series of business interactions with somebody. And this person has asked me about our church a number of times, has mentioned the fact that I work for our church, has asked me questions about it, and I've given her answers that were honest but brief. I realized after a number of weeks working with this person that the reason I was doing that is because I was putting her in a demographic that wouldn't like what we have here because of where she works, and the car she drove, and where she lived. I didn't even realize I was doing it. Until one day, sitting across the desk, she said, I think it's possible that Jesus is a human being and that wouldn't really matter. What do you think? And then she said, and I also think it's really important that we're honest about sexuality to our children, that people make informed decisions based on facts. What do you think? And I think it's important that we advocate for access to birth control as a feminist perspective. What do you think? And, my cousin's gay, but he's never had a chance to be involved in his church, and I don't think that's right. What do you think? And here I was with my jaw on the floor going, oh my God, what have I done? I was asking a consumer-type question. Do you want what we're selling? And I easily came to the conclusion, probably not. Had I asked myself, does the person across from this desk for me offer the opportunity to build a better world? The answer was absolutely yes. This is what I love about the year of engagement and service. Our neighborhood track, a couple of weeks ago, went and visited local congregations in the area. As you will guess, Unitarian Universalists in our church can be really good at dialogue with Reformed Jews. We can be extremely good at breaking fast with Muslims, at going to the Buddhist temple for meditation, or with doing justice work with the Methodists who are like us. It's very hard for us to literally go across the street to the Church of Christ and say, what can we do together? But that's exactly what our neighborhood track did a few weeks ago, and all of the kind of walls and stereotypes we tell about the surrounding culture were just dissolving in that moment. It was amazing. One of the churches that we visited, or our neighborhood track visited, was the Church of Christ. They told them they were going to be visiting. When they got there, they had a welcome team that specifically had been tasked with giving a warm welcome to the Unitarians from across the street. The sermon that day was the minister reciting from memory the Sermon on the Mount and saying that's the kind of life he believed his people were called to live. Afterward, the Church of Christ in the Park Cities was so excited that the Unitarians had come to visit that they asked if they could come to our place and go with the Unitarians to worship with the Catholics that afternoon. That is not the story I think we sometimes tell ourselves about the communities that literally are across the street from us. The consumer-type question gave us either a yes or no with them. It's isolating. The consumer-type question can be isolating inside the congregation as well. The move to be a producer, I think, is a lot richer experience, but it's hard. But I will tell you that no other religion I know goes around telling other people how good they are at dealing with difference. We're the only religion I know whose claim to fame is we don't have to think alike to love alike. We go around telling people we are really, really good at translating religious language and dealing with people who aren't like us. Well, congratulations, friends. We live in Dallas. You are going to get plenty of opportunities to test that assertion. Other communities may not be held accountable to that standard because that's not what they're promising. We're the ones who have said we're good at being able to work with people who don't believe like us, and so we are the people who will be held to that standard. It's hard to think of ourselves as producers of heaven on earth. It means that I'm much more responsible to the person sitting next to me in the pew than I would be otherwise. If my salvation depends on correct belief or allowing a deity into my life, then it would be very nice if the person next to me were incredibly hospitable and kind, but it would not be the determining factor. If our healing and wholeness is determined by how we treat one another, then whether the person sitting next to me on a Sunday morning experiences beloved community on earth is now very much my responsibility. And that's a difficult place to be in, but it's worth it. I think at the center of this entire idea is our religious notion that we are at home. We're at home on this earth, and we're at home in this city, and we're at home in this church. And that the simple but incredibly difficult calling is to treat the other human beings in this church, in this city, and on this planet like they were in our home, and not at the movies. When we laid hands on our friend a couple of weeks ago, we reminded the congregation that the act of ordination was not an act of delegation. It wasn't saying, now we have someone to treat others kindly and do the welcoming ministry of the church. It was a reminder that the church was using the power it already had, the power that you already have. And so I hope that you don't just feel permission to be the expression of this church to someone else. I hope you feel commissioned to do so. I hope you know how much your presence matters and how much the way that you greet someone at the door or sit next to someone in the pews or interact with someone in a classroom or in a service setting, or how you talk with the neighbor across the street who isn't like us but wants to know more about our church. All of these are you producing the ministry of the church. And we are so blessed and happy that you are here to do it with us. May you be lay ministers of this church in all the moments that you interact here and in the culture in which we will have so much opportunity to practice engaging beyond our old labels and lines. Bless you in this work, friends, and amen.